41 to base, crossing Italian coast. Crossing Italian coast. Opposition light. Proceeding to attack.
ENC Mediterranean to units in area Strait of Messina. Close with your target. Close with your target.
For fascist Italy, unhappy junior partner of the Axis powers, the day of reckoning has dawned. And with Mussolini's boasted strongholds crushed beneath the Allied might, the people of the free world are recalling the strange and bitter story which brought this tragic nation to its last and desperate hour. For 3,000 years, this sun-drenched land has been looked upon as the fountainhead of all that colorful, poetic warmth of spirit associated with the Latin world. Still vivid in the memory of thousands of tourists are the golden beaches and the gay cities that once made Italy the land of carnival. And familiar from childhood to millions everywhere are the Italian names that gave birth to the glory of the Renaissance. Giotto, Luini, Raphael, Leonardo and Michelangelo and Botticelli, Dante and Petrarch and Boccaccio, Columbus, Cabot and Amerigo Vespucci. Men whose intellect and vision released Europe from the Dark Ages and opened new realms of conquest for the human mind. Sometimes represented as soft and languorous romantics, the 44 million people of present-day Italy are in fact thrifty and hard-working, many of them subject to the ceaseless toil which the modern world has often meted out to those who are peasants at root and slow-working artisans by inclination. Only in the trattoria, the little restaurant where he can bring his meal or buy it, does the Italian working man become the voluble Latin of story and tradition. We only live once, he says, and here, seeking to forget his long day's work, he spends his leisure with the things he likes best in life: his wine, his friends, his music. For his benefit, the Italian state has subsidized for years the lush, full-throated operas of Verdi, Rossini, Donizetti, dressed in all their gaudy trappings. And though the famous opera houses like La Scala at Milan remain as formal as any in the world, yet in many an Italian city, the curtain rises on an audience which may have paid only a nickel a head to hear the nation's greatest singers.
Se ti ferma, ti placa, perdona, foglia me quel terribile aspetto, quella charro la sento nel petto, quella fissa mi colma d'arrosto.
But all through history, a greater presence has passed before the eyes of every Italian, that of the Church of Rome. For in the city that once conquered Europe by force of arms stands that other eternal city of the Spirit, the 100 acres of stately buildings clustered round the great Basilica of St. Peter's and known as the Holy See of the Vatican. From within the frontiers of this state within a state, surrounded by his own troops, the renowned Swiss and Palatine Guards, the Pope wields an authority through the world which many believe is hardly less decisive now than it was in the Middle Ages. On the great church occasions, the Vatican loudspeakers open their mouths across the roofs of Rome. And then it is that the faithful stand elbow to elbow in the huge colonnaded circle of the Piazza San Pietro, waiting for the moment when the glitter of pikes and the flash of jewels will herald the approach of the Holy Father himself, Pius XII, Pontifex Maximus, 261st successor to the throne of Peter, pronouncing over his 300 million children the blessing Urbi et Orbe, to the eternal city and to all the world. But behind the pomp and splendor, there is another Italy, a land mountainous and barren, to which nature has denied the material riches of the earth. Thus the Italian farmer, with his meager fields compressed into the narrow valleys, can never hope to feed his 40 million neighbors from his native soil alone. And even on the best land, the broad Roman Campagna and the rich acres of ancient Tuscany, the harvest is often subject to all the hazards of outdated methods and primitive equipment. And in the great industrial triangle of the North, the story of poverty of resources has ever been the same. From these machine shops, from the famous firms of Caproni and Fiat, Ansaldo and Montecatini, have come products admired by engineers the world over for their brilliance of design and performance. But always the freighters unloading in the ports have told their ominous tale of an Italy that was a have-not nation, dependent for her coal on the mines of England, and looking to the rich ore beds of the New World for the metals she did not possess herself. No wonder that with the captains of industry insisting on cheap labor to offset the high cost of imported materials, our working men should everywhere inherit a long tradition of discontent and a strong interest in socialism. And it was this paradox of universal poverty in a land so fair that in the early 20th century drove so many of Italy's most enterprising people to seek a brighter future overseas. To countless Italians, the sight of the great skylines of New York and Montreal have meant a lifelong dream fulfilled, have been the symbol of escape from unrewarding toil and of a better chance ahead. Today, it is said that everyone in Italy has an American relation, for now, one of the largest and most loyal of North America's foreign-descended populations are her 7 millions of Italian extraction. And of these men and women, an American president has said, by their genius for the sciences, by their love for the arts, by their rich sense of life, they have given much to making our country what it is. Scarcely noticed amid the chaos of World War I, there stood on a back street of industrial Milan in 1917 the headquarters of a socialist newspaper known as Avanti, Forward. And from these insignificant rooms, when, on the field of Caporetto, the Italian forces were in full retreat, a new voice was raised in the panic of the time. Down with the state, it cried. Italy needs food, but her leaders have given her only a useless army. So spoke an unknown left-wing journalist. Benito Mussolini. When the war was over, a disillusioned Italy turned to a new party. A party, its opponents said, composed of impetuous boys. And when in the swelling fascist ranks appeared the former socialist from Milan, many believed amid the confusion that the black shirt he now wore was the new fighting symbol of the people. For did he not promise at the very start, "We shall act not against the working class, but for it"? And before a parliament whose cheers of the moment were soon to end in permanent dissolution, the new prime minister proclaimed, "Within a decade, we shall change the physical and spiritual face of our beloved Italy. The first year of the fascist era has begun." And so across the land of Italy, there burst such a fury of reform that no city and no citizen was left in peace unchanged. I am at once an aristocrat and a democrat, a reactionary and a revolutionary, a legitimist and an illegitimist, declared the busy architect of Italy's new destiny. I am building a full-blown corporate state. Already, I control the forces of politics and those of economics. Soon I shall even control the great forces acting in nature. And this new and youthful Italy, born to fascist order or rejuvenated on the fields of fascist sport, sang to the glory of its Duce, "Youth, youth, springtime of loveliness, in fascism is our salvation and our new-found liberty." History and through the Alps, as the Italian saying goes, the hated Germans will return again. And to their brothers in fascism they returned again to form a friendship in conspiracy. But even while Goebbels sailed the lagoons of Venice and spoke of common cultural ties, Mussolini turned aside and said, "Pagliaccio, the man's a clown." And when von Ribbentrop visited Rome, he whispered of the Duce's son-in-law, Count Ciano, "Flatter the playboy's vanity, and all will then go well." And while the father of fascism himself waited at the Brenner Pass to keep the first of many trysts with the man who was at once his pupil and his master, perhaps he remembered that only a few months before, one of his papers had written of the Nazi chiefs, "They are murderers and pederasts, and nothing more." And no sooner had the dictators exchanged their careful greetings than Italian troops occupied the passes of the Alps, just to make sure. For at this very time, while a fitful peace still lingered over Europe's frontiers, Italy's leaders had other plans, were sifting the very sands of her shores in a steady drive to scrape together the resources needed to seize a place in the sun elsewhere. He who can make steel will soon have bread, they said. and Marshal Badoglio, whose men were later to use mustard gas in Abyssinia, smiled his approval and passed on. And with possible sanctions in his mind, the Duce personally assured himself that the good wine of Italy was making good synthetic fuel. It is proletarian Italy against the world, they cried. And bombing defenseless Abyssinians, the Duce's son remarked, "This is the most complete of sports." And while the black shirts fought on foreign fields, Italy's peevish little king, groomed to wear the imperial crown, gazed on the golden dream of an empire soon to be. But when the conquering was done, the reality was different. For to gain the unwilling service of a few bewildered Africans working on unproductive land, the bill was $1,000 million. No wonder that the streets of ancient Rome should see the greatest triumph since the days of Nero. For if the new empire could yield no bread, it was all the more essential to cover up the loss with circuses. And as the people watched this grandiose procession, perhaps a few remembered that nearly 20 years before, a certain journalist in Milan had said, "Down with the state. Italy needs food, but her leaders have given her only a useless army." Thus was fulfilled the poignant prophecy of Italy's great liberal patriot, Giuseppe Mazzini. Italy will yield the reins to the first man claiming authority to hold them. And this she will do because of her utter inexperience of the nature of great revolutions.
La forza!
We do not care if we are hated, he shouted on that day of hollow triumph. We do not care, because we have nothing but contempt for those who hate us. Today, the voice of fascism speaks differently. The Italian Empire is not dead, it says, but it is interrupted, and many of our countrymen are suffering from an indefinable sickness that one calls the African disease. But back in Italy, it is no African disease that has made 40 million people sick of war. For 3 years, they have lived on rations shorter than those of most of conquered Europe. For 3 years, they have seen the hated Germans returning yet again. And helpless in the hands of one invader, they have been watching, waiting for the coming of another. And with the Allied convoys heading for the gates of Italy, Italians everywhere are remembering the words spoken 4 centuries ago. Italy shall find her liberator, and it is our common hope that the true banner of this people may once more be raised among the nations of the world.